who's being asked the question to give any information other than yes, no. So students ask each other the questions, and when they find somebody who answers yes, they write that person's name in the column which says person. Then the student asking the questions needs to ask the person who said yes a follow-up question. So for example, with number 1, have you been to China? The follow-up question might be, when did you go? What did you see there? Did you enjoy your time in China and why? Can you bake a cake? The person who says yes, the follow-up question might be, what's your favorite cake? Or how did you learn? Or who taught you how to bake a cake? So we have students working individually, asking other students the find someone who questions, writing the names, and then asking a follow-up question to get more information. Students need to speak to as many people as possible, and they must have different names in the person column. They can't just have Ali, 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 Ali as the person saying yes all the time. So it's very important that students mingle around the classroom, move around the classroom, talk to as many different people as possible, so that they can ask as many people as possible different questions. Okay, is the activity clear? Can you just type in the text in the chat box if you've understood the activity? Just put yes or no. Hopefully everyone's going to write yes. Yes, 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 yes. Lots of yeses. Brilliant, brilliant. Okay, great, good. So, just one thing. If you're typing to me privately, change it to everyone. A couple of you are just replying to me privately. So reply to everyone in the chat box. Okay, great. So we understand what the Find Someone Who activity is. Now let's think about our 6 criteria. Now the first one was relevancy. Is the activity relevant to my students? Now if we go back to the questions, I've designed these questions based on my knowledge of my students, based on the fact that they'll be able to answer those particular questions. I know my students, and therefore I can make the activity relevant to them. If you decide to use this activity in your classroom, you can obviously change the questions to fit your students. If you look at question number 1, the grammatical structure there, has been, is present perfect. So I could, if I wanted to, if I was practicing, if the students were learning or practicing present perfect in the classroom, I could make all of the questions present perfect classrooms. Find someone who's been to China. Find someone who's eaten spaghetti. Find someone who's done this. Find someone who's done that. So we can make the activity fit a specific grammatical area, or even a vocabulary area as well. So it's up to us, the teacher, to make the activity relevant for the students. Our second criterion was choice. So is there any choice in the activity? Yes, I think there are 2 elements of choice. I think the first choice is who the student asks the question to. As I said earlier, the students need to stand up and move around, or sitting down. They can do this in groups, but the students choose who they ask the question to. So we have choice there. The student can also choose what the follow-up question is. So we've got 2 levels of choice in this activity. The third criterion is personalization. Is it possible for students to personalize this activity? Well, again, with the follow-up question, they have an opportunity to personalize the type of question that they're asking. Does Find Someone Who encourage real listening? Absolutely. Students need to be listening to each other in order to answer the initial Find Someone Who question, and then also to answer the follow-up question. So it definitely encourages real listening. The 5th criterion was whether or not there's a clear objective. And of course there's an objective. The objective is to find someone who, and also to gather the information, the follow-up information. And remember, that follow-up information can be fed back to the class as a whole once the activity has finished. And the 6th criterion was whether or not there's an information or an opinion gap. Well, absolutely, because the whole point of the activity is to find someone who can do different things. So yes, there's definitely an information gap. So the point of showing you the Find Someone Who activity was to get us to start thinking about what makes an activity effective, and we've looked at 6 broad criteria so far. But let's just go back now to the word Oracy and try and understand a little bit about where it came from. It was first used nearly 60 years ago by Andrew Wilkinson, who was a professor at Birmingham University in the UK. And Professor Wilkinson thought that, okay, we have the word literacy, which obviously applies to reading and writing, but we also need something which applies to listening and speaking. So he felt this necessity and came up with the term Oracy, so that we can focus on the Oracy skills, the speaking and the listening skills. He felt that speaking and listening skills are often neglected in the classroom. I don't know how you feel about this. We can't, unfortunately, have a discussion face-to-face about it at the moment, but do have a think about whether or not speaking and listening skills are neglected, and to what extent we focus on speaking and listening skills in the classroom. I think we do tend to look more at reading and writing because it's easier. It's less work possibly for the teacher to focus on reading and writing skills in the classroom. I think we also need to remember that in our first language, Oracy skills are learned right at the beginning of our lives. As soon as a child is born, then they begin to listen, and very soon they begin to make noises and then form words and language. And it's only when they go to school that children in their first language focus on reading and writing. Yes, of course, there is some reading and writing at home, but the vast majority of our reading and writing skills are learned at school. And I think in second language or third language situations, there's the assumption that it's the same, but of course it's not. Students don't learn their second and third language speaking and listening skills outside the classroom. All of the skills are learned in the classroom. So Professor Wilkinson decided that we need a term for our speaking and listening skills to use in educational contexts because of the neglect with listening and speaking skills in the language classroom. So this is why we have a new word. Let's focus now on the explicit details about Oracy. So Oracy, we know, covers speaking and listening skills, but specifically what? Well, we've already mentioned this. Oracy is about attentive listening. Now, again, I wish I could be speaking to you directly to get your opinion about attentive, but attentive means listening for purpose, listening so that I can do something with the information that I've just been listening to. This is not about just listening for the sake of listening, but listening so that I can do something. And if you think back to the Find Someone Who activity, students have to listen attentively in order to be able to answer the questions. But Oracy is not just about listening, it's not just about speaking, it's also about things like taking turns and understanding when it's my turn to speak and when it's your turn to speak and when it's somebody else's turn to speak. And it's being able to understand that I have to give other people an opportunity to speak, even if I haven't finished what I want to say myself. And going deeper into this, Oracy is also about having the ability to explain things and possibly to reformulate things if somebody hasn't understood. And furthermore, Oracy is about having the ability to ask questions, to seek more information, or maybe to get clarification on something that I haven't understood particularly well. And Oracy is about giving reasons for what I've said, for justifying my opinion, for reinforcing, if you like, the things that I've said. And Oracy is also about this. It's about building on the things that I've said, expanding on what I've said, maybe expanding on somebody else's ideas if I agree with them. And finally, Oracy is about choosing appropriate language. I think it's important at this point to state that Oracy is not just about English language teaching. If you think about these skills here, attentive listening, taking turns, explaining, reformulating, asking, seeking, clarifying, giving reasons, justifications, and building on ideas and choosing language, these are relevant for any curriculum subject. It doesn't matter whether you're teaching English or geography or science or maths, all of these skills are incredibly important. It doesn't even matter what language is being used in the classroom, whether it's Kurdish or Turkish or Arabic or Japanese or Spanish or French, it doesn't matter. All of these skills are incredibly important. We're going to go into a bit more detail now and look at the skills in detail, and I hope you'll begin to see that what I've just said is 100% true, that Oracy is not just about learning language, but it covers all of the curriculum subjects. Okay, so Cambridge University has produced an Oracy framework, and there are 4 main Oracy skills which they identify within the framework. So I'd like you to think about what those 4 main Oracy skills might be, and also think about what is included in each one. So there are 4 main, very broad Oracy skills. Now I'm going to tell you what the first one is, and then I'd like you to think and type in the chat box what you think the other 3 are, and I'll give you about 60 seconds to have a think about this. So the first main Oracy skill is physical, and we'll look in a minute at what's included within this physical Oracy skill. But just for the next 60 seconds or so, have a think of what the other 3 Oracy skills might be. And remember, we're thinking in broad terms. We're not thinking about specific skills of Oracy. We're thinking in very broad terms. Think in terms of boxes, big boxes. And in a minute, we're going to put the skills inside the boxes. So you've got about 60 seconds. Have a think, and you can type them in the text box. Okay, so we've got some great answers in the chat box. Thank you, everybody who's putting in their answers. Let me show you now on the screen what the 4 main Oracy skills are. We can already see physical. The second one is linguistic, and I think a couple of you mentioned that. The third one is cognitive, and I think some of you mentioned that. And the last one, many of you have mentioned this one, is the social and emotional. So the Cambridge Oracy framework identifies 4 main Oracy skills. As I said earlier, think about 4 big boxes. One box contains all the physical skills, the other the linguistic, the third one the cognitive skills, and the fourth one the social and emotional skills. So now let's have a think about what goes into these 4 boxes. If I was standing with you in a training room or a classroom, we were together, we could see each other, I would have to use plenty of physical Oracy skills. In other words, my body language, my eye contact with you would be incredibly important. Box number 2 in the linguistic box, obviously the structures and the vocabulary that I choose to use would be important. And in the third box, I'd need to be thinking very carefully about the content of what I'm saying to you, and maybe clarifying things that I say to you. And in the fourth one, I would need to be aware of how important it is to work well with others. That might be one of the things. And I also need a certain degree of confidence. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to give you a list of Oracy skills, and I'd like you to decide if they go into box number 1, physical, box number 2, linguistic, box number 3, cognitive, or box number 4, social and emotional. So let's start with an example: audience awareness. Which box do you think that goes into? You can type it in the chat box. Is it physical, linguistic, cognitive, or social and emotional? Where do you think it goes? Got social, got linguistic, got social, we've got physical, so we've got I think we've got all of the possibilities so far. That's fine, don't worry, that's fine. At least we're beginning to think about it. So I'm going to put some more examples up on the screen, and I'll give you a couple of minutes. I'll disappear for 2 minutes, and I'd like you to choose which box all of these Oracy skills go into. Is it physical, is it linguistic, is it cognitive, or is it social and emotional? And I'll just point out, even though you may think they could go into more than one box, according to the Oracy framework, they can actually only go into one of the 4 boxes. So here are the others. So you've now got 14 on the screen. Which box do they go into? Physical, linguistic, cognitive, social, and emotional. I'm going to disappear, and I'll come back in a couple of minutes and see what your answers are. You don't need to type anything. You can just do this on your own, or if you're with a partner. Don't type in the chat box. Just do it on your own. No need to type your answers, just do it on your own or with a partner. We'll do feedback in a minute, but don't type in the chat, it's not necessary. Okay, great. I know some of you started to type, but you know, we've got at least 100 people here, so we can't check all the answers in the chat box, I'm afraid. So I'm just going to give you the answers from the framework. Hopefully there'll be no surprises. So on the physical side, we need to include voice and body language. Remember, voice is not about the choice of language, it's about how the sound is actually produced. And in order to do that well, we need to use our mouth, our lips, and our tongue, as is true in any language. We're not just talking about English here. In the physical one, we have voice and we have body language. So these are subcategories of the physical Oracy skill. And what we'll do in a minute is have a look at some specific examples. In the linguistic box, we should have 4 categories. We have, not surprisingly, vocabulary and structure, and number 4 is the language variety. In other words, the range and the different types of words and phrases that somebody's using. Number 6 is our rhetorical techniques, and by rhetorical techniques we mean the way that we manipulate language to have a particular effect, and the use of idioms and so on. In the cognitive box, we need to be concerned here with the content, the things that we're actually saying, how we clarify and summarize something, the self-regulation, how we reason, and an awareness of our audience. So that means that in the social and emotional box, we have 3 subcategories. And here they are: working with others, in other words, in pairs and in groups, listening and responding. And also number 14, and this is often quite a challenge for students, is having confidence as a speaker, having confidence in being able to stand up there and produce the language which is required. Okay, so let's go in a bit deeper now, and I'm going to give you some specific skills, sub-skills if you like, which are important in Oracy, and we need to, I'd like you to again put them into one of the 4 boxes, into the physical, the linguistic, the cognitive, or the social and emotional. And once again, don't type into the chat box, because there's too many of you to be able to control what's written there. So just make a note on your own, or if you're with somebody, you can talk to each other about where you think all of these fit. Let's begin with an example. We know the answer to this, I'm sure. Clarity of pronunciation. As I mentioned earlier, we need to use our mouth, our lips, our tongue in order to have clear pronunciation. So this one obviously goes into the physical box. So here are the others. I'll give you 90 seconds or so to have a look at those and just decide if they're physical, linguistic, cognitive, or social and emotional. No need to type in the box. You don't need to type anything. Just keep this to yourselves. Okay, so hopefully you've had some time to look at those. Don't worry if you haven't finished, and please don't worry if you didn't get them all right. It's not a test. It's about starting to think and to consider what Oracy actually means. So on the next screen, I will give you some possible answers. Well, not possible answers, the answers. As we've already said, clarity of pronunciation is physical. How we structure and how we organize our talk is very much a linguistic skill. Time management comes under cognitive, thinking about the management of time that we have available. Self-assurance comes under the social and emotional category, being confident about the way we speak. And fluency and the pace of the speech, this comes from the physical side. And then we have 2 for linguistic, obviously grammar and register, the level of formality. And then staying on task, the task focus, that comes under cognitive. And then we have 2 for social and emotional, turn taking, knowing when to stop, knowing when to let the other person have a turn. And as we've said many times already in this webinar today, being able to listen actively and to respond appropriately. And then the final 2, facial expression and eye contact, is obviously a physical skill. And finally, summarizing, which comes under content. Okay, so we've looked in a lot of detail now about what the skills are, and this is a good opportunity to summarize the importance of oracy, why it's so important, and why it's critical for us as teachers to embrace it and to understand what it is. So just going back to Wilkinson said that oracy is not a subject, but it's a condition of learning in all subjects. And I've already pointed out that oracy doesn't just apply to English language teaching, but it also applies to the maths classroom, the science classroom, and even classrooms where students are learning a different language, or at least, at the very least, using a different language. So I think what we're saying here is that without oracy, students are not going to learn as well. And in fact, Wilkinson continues by saying that oracy is actually a means of learning. In other words, I think it's essential that students have strong oracy skills, because if they don't, then they're going to suffer in terms of their learning abilities. And thinking very broadly now, let's not just think about the language classroom, let's think about all learning contexts, all learning situations. What is it that we want our students to be able to do ultimately? We want them to be able to make presentations. I'm sure there are cases where students in the geography or the history class or the science class need to present something, to present an idea, and they need to be able to do that with confidence, and it needs to be clear, and it needs to be persuasive. They need to make other people, the ones who are listening, agree with what they're saying. As I said, this is not just about the language classroom, this is about all classrooms and educational contexts. We also want our students to be able to engage in discussions when we put them into groups, when we put them into pairs, when we have whole class discussions. It's incredibly important that students can involve themselves in those discussions. We also want our students to be able to work well in groups and to find solutions to problems. Now, if a student is confident working in a group, they'll be much more able to find solutions to the problems that we set them. And part of working in groups, remember, is also being able to help other people to learn. Mixed ability groups, we know, are the most effective way of setting up groups, but we don't want less able students to struggle, so encouraging other students to helping others to learn is a key part of oracy skills. And finally, and I think in many ways, the most important need that we have for oracy is beyond the classroom. We want our students to be able to go out into the big wide world and engage fully with wider society, whether it's employment or possibly into another form of education. But our job as teachers stops in the school, but children leave school and they go on to inhabit a wider society. So oracy, having good oracy skills, will help our students to be successful in a wider society. Okay, so how can we make sure that it happens in the classroom? I think there are 5 broad classroom practices. In other words, 5 things that we need to be aware of as teachers, 5 strategies that we need to adopt if we want oracy to happen in the classroom. So I'm going to show you the 5 practices. I've removed one word from each of the practices, and it's your job to put a word into the gaps. After about 30 seconds, I'll give you the 5 words jumbled up, and you can decide where they go. So here's the 5 classroom practices. Please don't worry if you don't understand what the practices are. We're going to talk about them. And also after the webinar, I'll make sure you receive a document which explains the 5 practices in more detail. So here they are. The first one is use dialogic teaching blank, promote blank learning, design tasks that promote blank talk, blank ground rules, and teach Oracy skills blank. So I'll give you just a minute or so, have a think. And here are the words to help you. Collaborative approaches, establish explicitly and effective. Where do they go? And again, don't worry if you're not 100% clear. We'll be talking a little bit about them now, and then I'll make sure you get a document afterwards which will help you to understand better. Yes, a different answer for each blank. Okay, so here we go. Let's have a look at the answers. The first one, use dialogic teaching approaches. Don't worry if you don't understand the meaning of dialogic. We're going to have a look at it in just a minute. Second one, promote collaborative learning. Third one, design tasks that promote effective talk. Fourth one, establish our ground rules. And the fifth one, teach oral skills explicitly. So let's have a quick look at what these 5 things are in just a little bit of detail. And if you want more information, as I said, you'll be receiving a document which you can read after the webinar. So the first one, use dialogic teaching approaches. Dialogic, dialogue, getting students talking to each other, getting students talking to you, the teacher, asking and answering questions. The whole point here is that if we choose the right questions, then that will promote the right type of thinking and then the right type of answer from our students. What we ultimately want is for the students to think in different ways, to argue in different ways, to explain things in different ways, and all of this will help to lead them to a higher order critical thinking. Okay, the second classroom practice is promoting collaborative learning. We've already mentioned several times today the importance of getting students to talk to each other and to promote attentive and real and active listening. And I'm sure that you've come across the 4 things I'm going to mention. You know what these 4 things are, but I think it's important to understand why they're so important. The first one, of course, is putting students into pairs. As soon as you put students into pairs, you've increased a high level of participation in your classroom, and you can ensure that whatever discussions are going on are very highly focused. Students may not want to work in pairs, but if we want to promote collaborative learning, it's really important that we do encourage it in the classroom. Not for every activity, not even every day, but we need to think about using pairs to promote particular responses. Secondly, something which I call envoys, but you can also call it ambassadors or group leaders or whatever you want. But envoys are used when you have your students working in groups. Students are working on something in their group, and one person from the group, the envoy, the ambassador or the group leader, leaves the group and goes to another group, taking with him or her information from their own group and delivering it to a different group, and then collecting information from the different group and taking it back to the first group which they started from. So this is a great of sharing information between groups. And of course, there are many different ways that you can do it. You could have 2 envoys going to 2 different groups. You can have envoys going to all the groups in the classroom, etc., etc. So there are many different ways that you can set it up. And you'll find some more ideas when you get the document that I've referred to. Third idea, snowball. Now, I'm sure you've all seen snowballs in cartoons, a snowball rolling down a mountain, and as the snowball rolls down, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And the idea is the same can happen in a classroom. This is a bit similar to the think, pair, share interaction that we may use with our students. So initially we have a very small snowball, and the small snowball is basically one student. And we give the students time to think on their own individually. And then the student joins another student to make a pair. And if you put the 2 snowballs together, then the snowball will actually, of course, get bigger. And then the pair joins up with another pair. So 2 becomes 4, and our snowball becomes even bigger. And then 4 join 4, and we get 8, and our snowball gets even bigger. And so we go on until potentially the whole class has made one enormous virtual snowball. So it's a wonderful way to get students talking to each other and sharing their ideas and giving each other feedback. And the final one to mention is jigsaw. And imagine that you have a topic to be discussed or a text to be read, and rather than giving the whole class the whole topic or the whole text, we split it up between groups. Imagine cutting up a topic into different sections. So one group talks about this part of the topic, another one discusses another part, another group discusses another part, and so on. So each group is reading or talking about something different. We then join people from the groups together so they can share ideas about the things that they've been talking about or the things that they've read. And in this way, we put the jigsaw together so that we have a complete picture at the end. It needs some careful classroom management. You need to think about who's in the groups and how you're going to organize it. But it's a really very effective speaking and listening strategy, not least because it ensures that everybody in the classroom is going to be engaged. The third classroom practice is about designing tasks that promote effective talk. Effective talk, I think here what we mean is realistic talk, communicative talk, not mechanical, meaningless talk that has no real purpose. And in order to do this, we need to make sure that there's a single group outcome. In other words, that the group requires, or the task requires all the group to participate, and in order to achieve the group outcome. Let's be careful about time constraints. If we give our students too much time on a particular topic, they get bored, they lose their engagement, and this is the time, of course, when classroom management becomes an issue. So keep things short and sharp. Challenge your students, give them a little bit of pressure to complete things within a certain amount of time. There's no reason why you can't extend the time. If you see them are on task and engaged and working hard, then give them a little bit more time. That's far better than if you give students far too long and they just get bored with whatever the activity is. Make sure that the outcome is very clear to your students, and it could be something that you actually discuss with the students and you agree with them, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar. This also is a discussion about how the students are actually going to reach the outcome, perhaps by identifying different roles for different students which they can select themselves. It's also important that we engage students in different kinds of talk, different talk genre. In other words, let's not always make it a discussion. Give them opportunities to have argumentative talks, maybe talks in which they have to describe something or develop something, etc., etc. So giving students practice in different kinds of talks will, of course, encourage different types of language as well. And finally, for this classroom practice, we want our students to be able to link what they're talking about to their own experiences. We mentioned personalization earlier this afternoon. It's very important that students have that opportunity to be talking about themselves, building on their own experiences. The fourth one is about establishing ground rules, classroom rules. What is it that's acceptable in a speaking activity in the classroom? And I think, again, this is something you can agree with students. Very often when I'm visiting classrooms, I see the walls, classroom walls with lists of rules for students, but I don't see many rules for teachers. And I think establishing ground rules is a great way for the teacher to be involved, along with the students, in establishing what the rules are for everybody. And of course, these rules need to be on display so that students can refer to them. I'm not talking now about classroom management rules, but I'm talking about Oracy rules. In other words, I will let my partner have an opportunity to talk. I will listen attentively. I will ask relevant questions, and so on. Those are the type of ground rules that I'm referring to. And just a reminder, on the document that I'll circulate after the webinar, you'll be able to read about this in more detail. And the fifth classroom practice is that we need to teach Oracy skills explicitly. In course books, there will often be lessons on speaking and focus on speaking, but we're talking now about an explicit focus on teaching all of the Oracy skills that we've been mentioning in today's webinar. And the first way of doing this, of course, is modelling, to provide students with a model of good Oracy skills which they can listen to or they can watch in order to get an idea of what's required. And part of this will, of course, involve pre-teaching vocabulary and phrases. Now, you may be thinking, well, I do that anyway, but you're probably thinking about topic vocabulary and topic phrases. In other words, vocabulary and phrases which are relevant to a particular topic. What I'm talking about here is vocabulary which can be used for different talk types. So we're talking more about phrases, maybe some idioms and sentence starters, which can be used across different types of talk types. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail in now the final part of this afternoon's webinar. So we've thought about what Oracy is. We've got a definition of it, a broad definition. We've looked at why it's important. We've looked at the 5 areas of classroom practice, in other words, things that you need to be aware of as a teacher. Let's go on to the last part now, which is about incorporating Oracy. In other words, okay, so how can we move the theory into the classroom? This doesn't need to be a great challenge, and I'm sure with many of you it's something that you're already aware of and trying to do. But I think there are basically 6 things that we need to be considering. The first one is we need to understand what the skills are. What are these Oracy skills? And we need some sort of framework so we can identify them and appreciate their importance, and when we should be teaching them and developing them, and when we can leave them to one side. Luckily, the Faculty of Education at the University of Cambridge has already done this for us. We have a framework, so you don't need to identify skills and create your own. If you just Google Cambridge Oracy Framework, you'll find loads and loads more information than I gave you earlier. I just gave you an overview of all of the different categories and skills. But if you want to know more, then of course, just Google it. But what we do need to do is the second one, which is provide our students clear language support, and I'll talk more about that in just a second. Thirdly, we need to provide our students with models. Fourthly, we need to create specific tasks. Fifthly, we need to provide opportunities for reflection. And finally, we need to give opportunities for students to remember the things that we've been talking about. Now, none of this is new. We've mentioned all of these things already, but let's just finish off this afternoon's webinar by looking at these in just a little bit more detail. So in terms of language support, let's give our students sentence starters. If you look at these examples, I hope they're clear. If you look at these examples, they can be used with any type of speaking activity that the students are involved in. Anything that involves presenting or discussing or arguing or explaining or describing, all of these are key phrases which the students can use. Now, in the picture, you can see that they've been put up on a cupboard door or a classroom door. Remember, our job is to teach students. Our job is to support students. So the more language items you can put on classroom walls, the more likely students are to use them and to become confident in using them and to remember them. So this is just one example. Another idea is to use cue cards as sentence starters. So instead of putting these on the wall, you can have sets of these cue cards. Each group in the classroom could have a set of cards. They have them in front of them, and when they're involved in a speaking activity, they can have these in front of them and choose phrases or words, expressions which are relevant to the speaking activity that they're in. And when students have these sentence starters, either the classroom posters or the cue cards, then they can start talking about whatever the topic is. So there's our language support. And of course, this is in addition to the topic vocabulary that the students might need to talk about the environment or sport or whatever it might be. The third one is about providing models. And what we mean here is that we're showing students examples of what we want from them when they come to do their speaking activity. So they could be observing maybe other classes at your school. That might be an opportunity. If not, in the second column, they could watch videos of students modelling good Oracy skills. In the third column, let's not forget that teachers provide an excellent model for their students. And in the final column, we've got using animations, using cartoons, which could compare and contrast Oracy skills and indeed behaviours. So the fourth thing we need to be aware of is about creating tasks. And here's an example from a recent course book, which has got a diagram describing climate change. If you read what it says at the top, number 6, climate change is one effect of burning fossil fuels. Look at the pictures and try to understand the process. So we have a thinking activity to begin with, and then a couple of activities in the student's book, working with a partner, use the pictures and the words, create a cause-effect chain, show how climate change can happen, use a dictionary, work with a partner, describe the chain, use linking words, and so on. And 2 other activities, work with a partner, look back, add information, write phrases, and so on and so forth. So we're creating tasks which encourage students to develop their Oracy skills. The 5th one is about reflection. Now we need to encourage our students to reflect on the tasks that they've completed. We need them to reflect on each other, on themselves, and of course to do assessment, which is led by the teacher. So I'm going to show you some examples now of how this appears in course books. Maybe in the course books that you're using, if you're using Cambridge Primary Path or Little Steps, you'll be familiar with all of this. So here's an example of peer assessment. It tells the students to give their presentation to the rest of the class, and while the others are listening, they need to take notes, make questions, and ask the questions, and then talk together about how to solve the problems. So this is a form of assessment and engagement with other people in the classroom. Self-assessment, you'll be familiar with these types of things. You see them at the end of units. These are not specific to Oracy skills, but I think it gives you an idea so I'm just clearing the annotation from the screen. It gives you an idea of how students can self-assess. And then, of course, an example now of teacher-led assessment. This could be a checklist for each student. Not an easy thing to do if you have a large number of students, but certainly something to consider. The teacher can be recording the stage of achievement for the student, doing observations. You could video the class and then they could watch themselves, and so on and so forth. And finally, the last point here is about reminding our students and about constantly repeating the ground rules and making sure that students remember what they have to do in order to develop their Oracy skills. And one way you might do this is with cartoons. These could be posted on the classroom wall. about students and how to have effective oracy skills. And you can just give yourself a little test and ask yourself, are these physical? Are they linguistic? Are they cognitive? Or are they social and emotional? Just ask yourselves that. For example, the girl in the top right, remember to project your voice. Not linguistic, it's physical. Bottom right, the little boy, don't forget to ask follow-up questions. Where would you put that? Is it cognitive? Is it social and emotional? So we can use the framework to design these reminders for our students. Okay, I've just about come to the end. I'm going to ask you to summarize for yourselves. I'm not going to summarize, you're going to summarize. You don't need to tell me anything, you don't need to write anything, you don't need to say anything. You can tell each other if you're with somebody, or keep it to yourself if you're alone. But I want you to consider three things. The first one is this: oracy is. So just think about that to yourself, keep it quiet, keep it personal. How would you complete that phrase in your head? Oracy is what? And the second thing I want you to consider is this: oracy is important because... And finally, and I hope you have an answer for the third one, is this: an oracy teaching approach I will try is... So three things to consider, three things to take away, three things to get you to reflect on this afternoon's webinar. And as I said at the beginning, you've now got an opportunity to ask any questions, and after this I'll explain how to get your certificate of attendance. But if anybody has any questions, please type them in the chat box. Remember to type the question to everyone, not to me personally. Any questions? Anything anybody wants to ask? Any questions? Everybody wants to disappear and start the weekend. Thank you for all the thank yous. You're all extremely welcome. I just wish I could be there with you and doing this face to face. Hopefully in the near future I can come back and see you face to face. Thank you for all the thank yous. Okay, so here's the barcode. So you can either scan the barcode or copy the link at the bottom, and it will ask you to complete a short survey, and that will help us to get your certificate. You won't get it immediately, it'll take us a week or so, because this is the fourth repeat of this webinar. We've had, hundreds and hundreds of teachers attending, so it's going to take us some time, but you will get an attendance certificate as long as you fill in the survey. Okay, so thank you so much again to everybody. Please stay safe, take care of yourselves, and I hope this coronavirus goes away very, very soon so that we can all get back to some normality.